You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today, but before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatobi for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This podcast is brought to you by the Oklahoma Beef Council on behalf of Oklahoma's 50,000 beef farming and ranching families. We are working hard every day to bring high quality beef to your table. To learn more, visit oklabeef.org, linked below. This episode is presented by the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw people have a rich history and a bright future. At the Choctaw Cultural Center, you can take part in a story 14,000 years in the making. Stroll through our immersive exhibits portraying Choctaw life from the moment our ancestors emerged from the Nani Weha in Mississippian homelands to the Trail of Tears, where we lost so many loved ones, and finally to the modern-day tribe making a positive impact on local communities throughout southeastern Oklahoma. Try your hand at our social dancing and stickball and learn more about our vibrant culture through demonstrations, workshops, and classes. The kids will have a blast in our Luxie Activity Center. The Choctaw Cultural Center is more than a museum. It's a living, breathing experience. Visit choctawculturalcenter.com to plan your visit. And let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode down in Automobile Alley today. I recognize the steakhouse that's right next door. I really reference it all the time to people. The building next door, I think, is the one that was in, what was that, Sylvester Stallone series, Tulsa King, that they used as the Mayo replica for many times. I've driven by this building so many times, but this is a really cool office you have.
Thank you.
This is fantastic.
Thank you. We really like it.
Yeah, it's a cool spot. And I was at lunch with a friend of mine just now, and he's a lawyer as well, and I mentioned your name, and he goes, "You're gonna have a great time." He's a legend. So he's also an OU grad, but anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast Mr. Reggie Whitten. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So you've done a lot of things, and maybe we won't get to everything today, but I am excited to dive into your story. You were inducted in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. You're in the OU Hall of Fame for the OU Law Hall of Fame. Is it Order of the Owl? Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Okay, that's someone who not really an OU. I'm an OSU fan. Sorry.
I am too.
Well, there we go then. Great. So you've done loads of things, and so many things, not just in the law world as well. But today we're going to dive into kind of what makes you tick. So let's start with growing up. You grew up from Seminole, Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Tell me what it's like growing up as a young boy in Seminole, Oklahoma.
I got to say, I'm really proud that I got inducted into the Seminole Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Can't leave them out. But Seminole's about an hour east of Oklahoma City, where I currently live and practice law. I'm really proud to be from Seminole. Those were my roots. I left there at the age of 18. But, my dad was a used car salesman. My mom ran a shoe store. I had two brothers, and I was a very young father. I had a baby when I was 4 days past my 21st birthday. And I had never been around children before. I have a very small family. Neither of my parents had an opportunity to graduate from high school or college. And so we were, I guess you would describe us as kind of a typical blue-collar family. The thing I got from my parents that made the biggest impact in my life was just working hard. I mean, that's all they did was work. And, you know, I started working at my dad's car lot probably, you know, before I can even remember, just at a young age, sweeping and cleaning cars and washing cars. And so I got my work ethic there. I really like working. I always have. And I had no idea how I was going to go to college. I would have loved to have been, you know, a great athlete like you. I dabbled in golf.
Has been athlete.
Well, I was not very athletic, but I tried. But no, I was in band and speech and debate. And, you know, I found very early on that I was not a very gifted public speaker. I was very shy. I used to throw up before every round of debate. But I also found that I loved competition. It was pretty cool competing. And I wanted so badly to win the state debate championship. And we came in second 3 different times. And finally, as a senior, I finally won. My partner and I won first place. And I'm not bragging, I'm just saying the facts. I really thought I was destined to come in second for the rest of my life. And but that changed my life. Originally, in the 8th grade, I was planning on being a preacher. Okay. I grew up in the Baptist church, but I was so shy that I got involved in the debate program to learn to speak publicly. And then I just decided by the end of the 8th grade, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. You know, I saw To Kill a Mockingbird. And at that time, lawyers, I think, were revered. In my hometown, there were a bunch of really good lawyers. And, you know, my dad drank coffee with them, introduced me to them. And I looked up to them. And, you know, I loved school and learning and history. And this country was built on the rule of law. That's what makes us different. And somewhere in the late 70s, the U.S. Supreme Court changed everything. They allowed lawyers to advertise. And they said lawyers have a free speech right to advertise. And that really changed everything, because I think when those ads started popping up, at least in my hometown, I was asked by all the locals, you know, they're so proud of me that I was going to law school. The minute I got out of law school, it was almost like my status changed, because people didn't really like lawyers, at least not unless they knew them before or they really needed one. So I'd love to change that, but it's somewhat difficult to do. Yeah. Everybody has an opinion, but I love being a lawyer. I love helping people. And you know, I love working. So I kind of divide my life into 2 parts, pre and post my son's death. So I'll talk about that if that's all right.
Yeah, let's get into it, yeah.
Yeah, so Brandon was born, like I said, I was barely 21, and I found out that I kind of had a knack with little kids. I had no clue, but I love little kids. Even today, now I have grandchildren, and they seem to gravitate towards me. They sure seem to crawling all over me and sitting on my head and, you know, playing. But I love having kids, and Brandon was my first. And, you know, the first 22 years of his life couldn't have gone better. By the time he was a senior in high school, he was going to Westmore High School, which at that time was the largest high school in Oklahoma. And he was a lot better looking and a lot bigger than me. He was 6'3", and in high school he was 265 pounds. I probably weighed 165 pounds. And but he was such a handsome kid, had a lot more hair than me too. But he was so nice. And all he ever wanted to be was a lawyer. He wanted to do what I did. He would come watch some of my trials and, He was my biggest fan at that time. So, I thought everything had gone pretty well. He was raised right. He knew the difference between right and wrong. He's very healthy. The idea that he could get a disease of the brain was foreign to me. So he graduated. He was the homecoming king. I thought he was going to play football at OSU. Pat Jones had told him they were going to offer him a scholarship, but Pat Jones left OSU, and so his opportunity to play there, he lost that. I tried to get him to walk on at OU. I thought we had a chance to do that, but he had always been, a starter, and he didn't want to walk on. So he went out and played ball in Arkansas for a year, and both of us were homesick. So he came back and he played college ball at Southwestern in Weatherford. So fast forward to, he was 22 years old. We were looking at trying to get him in law school. So I got a call one night. I think it was a Friday evening. It was midnight. And I was told Brandon was in the hospital. He had had a car accident, and he had been driving down I-40 heading from Oklahoma City back to Weatherford, and he had had an accident. That's all I knew. They told me to go to the hospital in El Reno. It was a pretty long drive to that hospital. When I got there, there wasn't hardly anybody there, but in the emergency room waiting area, there were some people. His girlfriend at the time was this lovely young lady, 20 years old, and she was sitting in the emergency room with her mother, and I couldn't see a scratch on her, but they'd stuck a tube down her throat. She had been hanging upside down in the car, both of them, from their seatbelts, and there was water in this little creek, and they both had ingested some of that dirty water. They almost drowned, and the first thing I thought was, thank the Lord that she's okay. So I turned my attention to Brandon, and he'd actually been injured, I thought, more seriously. He had a very serious arm injury. We thought he might lose his arm. He didn't. But once the dust settled, of course, I asked what happened, and he was always honest with me until this disease of the brain got a hold of him. But anyway, he tells me later he'd had a drink or two and had taken some pills. He wasn't sick. He didn't have a prescription for anything. And it turned out, he told me later, in the weight room, they played on a national championship Division II football team. In that same weight room, they were passing around these pill bottles. And, somebody had a prescription for opioids, and occasionally they took benzos, and they would mix them with alcohol. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe my own son, who I knew so well, would do that. So then I find out that he's addicted to them. But anyway, back to his girlfriend. She never did get out of that hospital. She got all that muddy water in her lungs and ultimately passed away because of an infection. And that just rocked the world of her family and our family. And I had never seen a young person lose their life before, and Brandon certainly hadn't. So that was a big change. And my son was so nice. He was big. He was really a great football player, but he was a gentle giant, and he had survivor guilt, and it just, he never was the same. But he had a bigger problem. If there could be a bigger problem than a broken heart, he was addicted to these pills. Now, I didn't even know what that meant. I'm not proud of that, but I grew up in Seminole. I had never knowingly been exposed to anybody with an addiction problem When I was growing up, the only thing I ever saw was beer and cherry vodka. That was it. But it's a different world now. And I used to watch the Andy Griffith Show and Otis the Town Drunk, and that's what I thought an addict was. Really, I'm not proud of that, but today I know it is a disease. Just like diabetes is a disease of the pancreas, it is a disease of the brain, and that's the most complicated organ we have in the body. I also know it's kind of a different disease. It is caused by a substance, and it can be opioids, it can be benzos, it can be alcohol, it can be tobacco. But it changes the chemistry of the brain. So my son looked the same. And when he was not under the influence, he acted the same. But under the cover, under the hood, in the brain, he was different. And he began to behave in a way that was foreign to me. A hallmark of addiction is bad behavior. We know now the science of addiction, but we didn't know, or at least I didn't know it. Addiction is a disease that masquerades sometimes as bad behavior. Now, why would it do that? You become diabetic or you have some other disease, you don't necessarily behave any differently, but addiction takes over the part of the brain. The scientists know this. It's the same part of the brain that regulates hunger and thirst and other basic instincts like breathing. You can't hold your breath and kill yourself. You can try, but that part of the brain will take over and say, Reggie, you're going to breathe whether you want to or not. And that's the part of the brain that these drugs hijack, and they hijack it with a vengeance. That part of the brain lies to you and tells you you only have one purpose in life. It's not school, it's not your family, it's not your loved one. One purpose, get that drug and get more of it. And it's so hard to understand it. But we know all this now. It's not speculation, it's science. But the general public still probably doesn't understand that. We need to get that word out there. But that's what happened to my son. So for 3 years, not understanding that, we did everything wrong. I sent him to a rehab, pretty expensive, 30 days. I didn't know that the efficacy of a 30-day rehab is about 20%. And they don't really tell you that. But the truth is, with addiction, recidivism is the norm. Typically, people are on it, off, on, off, on, off. And if you're lucky, you will have some crashes, but if you're lucky, you'll survive. 3 years after this surfaced and we found out about Brandon's disease, he died in a motorcycle wreck. And that was the second funeral of a young person that I had attended. So that's the end of the first part of my life. I remember everything before Brandon died, but I'm not the same person. I'll just say this, we're hardwired to give our lives for our children in a heartbeat, and I would have. But I did everything I could think of, and I just didn't know what to do, and we failed. So, that's something I'm going to live with. And so I struggled a little bit, to put it mildly. I couldn't really figure out what to do. I had other children, and I felt like just dying, but I couldn't do that. I had a responsibility. My youngest daughter, Hannah, was, I don't remember now, 4 or 5. She was a baby. And Dylan was 9 or 10, and so it was a pretty tough situation. My oldest daughter, Chrissy, was, I believe, 16. So I couldn't check out, or I might have, to be honest with you. I'm not proud of saying that, but that's how I felt. And So I was very fortunate. I met my wife 3 months after Brandon died, and she's a very unusual person. She has a knack for helping people who are injured. That was the first step in my recovery, I guess you'd say. And in November of 2002, some of my friends were so worried about me because my wife helped a lot. She kept me alive, but I was still suffering. And, you never get over losing a child. You either learn to live with it or you live with it and you're just miserable. So in November of 2002, a couple of friends of mine dragged me over to Uganda, and I knew nothing about Uganda. They kind of forced me to go. And at that time, there was a terrible war going on over there. They had a guy named Joseph Kony who was basically a terrorist, and he was kidnapping tens of thousands of children, and he would make the little boys sex slaves and the little boys he would make child soldiers, and the little girls he would make sex slaves. And it was quite a war, and it was still going on when we went over there. And I went with a guy named Bob Hunter, who is from Washington, D.C. He had built schools and churches and other things. He'd been going over there for years, and he was totally fearless. So we actually went in northern Uganda, where the travel advisory said don't go. And he introduced me to a little nun. I'm not Catholic. I grew up in the Baptist church, but Sister Rosemary Narumbi was her name. And, she is a very educated lady. She had a master's degree. She was educated in Italy, but she grew up in Uganda. She could have gotten out of there. She chose to stay there. And while Kony was kidnapping and killing, she was putting up signs for children to come to her church, and she would protect them. And she was going on radio shows like yours and telling the children to come to her. I don't know why they didn't kill her. It's a miracle. But she saved tens of thousands of lives. And I got to meet her, and that helped me a lot. It made me realize there's people that have it worse than me back in Oklahoma. So on the plane ride back home, I remember thinking, I need to do something to help her. And one of the things I needed to do is I needed to get her story out there, because nobody knew who she was then. She's quite famous now, but nobody knew who she was. So we came back and we started a nonprofit called Pros for Africa, pros being professionals. And I had a young lawyer that worked for me by the name of Jay Mitchell, and he was an aspiring sports agent, but also a lawyer. And he knew a lot of famous NFL players. And so we started taking a bunch of NFL players. We probably took 50 or 60 over the years over there, and they helped us raise money. And we gradually began to raise more and more money. And we changed the landscape over there. $1 will go a long way over there. But we didn't feel like that was enough. So, in my day job, I write a lot. I'd never written a book, so we decided to write a book. I got a friend of mine to help me co-author a book about Rosemary's life. And so we decided also to make a film, and the book and the film are called Sowing Hope. And the reason we chose that name is it's hard to live without hope. I found out I couldn't live without hope. I had to have hope. And the only thing that gave those kids hope over there was Sister Rosemary. The other thing about sewing, I can tell you I can't even sew a button on, but Rosemary is not a seamstress, but she taught those kidnapped children how to sew, and they made their own clothes. They started selling clothes. So my wife and Rosemary together started building purses out of pop tabs, the same pop tabs that's on a Coke can or, any kind of can. And so we started collecting millions of those tabs, and Rosemary and my wife Rochelle started sewing them together with really tough thread. These things are durable. You can put them in the washing machine. You cannot destroy them. And so they began making those purses. They went over there. They taught these girls who, they don't have a job. They taught them how to make purses. So we started making and selling those purses. And we've made a lot of money and kept the school open. Now they have 2 schools. Tens of thousands of kids have gone through those schools in Gulu, Uganda, and Adiak, Uganda. And that's been quite a boon. We kind of had to shut it down when COVID-19 hit because we couldn't make those trips anymore. But that's a very interesting story. And so we changed the name to Sowing Hope. That's Sowing Hope Foundation. You can Google it. And we've sold a lot of purses. The book is Sowing Hope, and all the profit from the book and the movie went to her foundation. And they told us you'll never get a movie privately made on Netflix, but we did. We got it on the documentary film section for 3 years. It was on the front page of Netflix. And my filmmaker is a guy named Derek Watson here in Oklahoma City. He's a genius. And he did the voiceover of the first film. Before we published it, we ran into Forrest Whitaker. Sister and I were in Washington, D.C. Well, he made a film called The Last King of Scotland in Uganda about Idi Amin.
So I've seen it. Good movie.
Well, he knew all about Rosemary. He just went nuts when he met her and asked, what can I do to help? So I said, would you do a voiceover for our film? So he did the voiceover for the movie Sowing Hope. You can Google it, sowinghope.com, and boom, you can watch it. But it's a great show, and it told the story of all the stuff she's been through, and it did quite well. And it put her on the map. She became a CNN hero. She became a Time 100 most significant people in the world. And so kind of the rest is history. And so that's part of the story. I also founded a nonprofit called FATE, Fighting Addiction Through Education. And I studied my son's problem. As a lawyer, I have a lot of complicated medical cases. I'm not a doctor, but if I have an orthopedic case or a case involving a drug or medical device, I have to learn that medicine. So that's what I've done obsessively for 21 years, is study the science of addiction. And I've learned a lot. The first thing that hit me was my own family doctor really didn't know much about addiction. And I finally figured out they don't really teach the science of addiction to all doctors. They felt like they didn't really need to. Now, if you're a psychiatrist, you get tons of that stuff. But that was a personal peeve of mine, and I started telling all my friends. I have a lot of doctor friends, and my daughter's a doctor. So I ran into a young lady who was a professor at Oklahoma State Med School named Casey Schrum. And so, as you probably can tell, I like to talk, so I told Casey my pet peeve. And she just sat there and listened. Later on, she told me that she was a little disturbed by what I said and was defensive and didn't really think there was any merit to what I thought. But she drilled down and kind of changed her mind and said, we can do better. So she then became the dean of the Oklahoma State Med School. And Oklahoma State Med School became one of the first schools in the country to start mandating a little more education about addiction. And she has done that at that school. And that's, I think, a game changer. So even today, we work together on a lot of addiction-related issues. And now she's the president of Oklahoma State. Most college presidents, that's a really tough job. Most of them would walk away from, their prior job, but she didn't. She's staying heavily involved in that addiction issue and teaching the science of addiction. So anyway, you might ask what FATE does. To cure the addiction problem, this country needs the E in FATE. Education. It's the key. If you just think about, say, any disease, like talk about AIDS. You can't really deal with AIDS, right, until you know what it is, how it's transmitted. When it first happened, when AIDS first made it to the United States, the doctors really couldn't understand what it was. It took a while. Well, they figured out it's a virus. Then they figured out the most common method of transmission. It's bloodborne. And so once they knew that, they began to take steps and educate the public, and millions of lives have been saved. So I figured out, why isn't that true with every disease? We need to know how it works, how to stop it, how to treat it. So the education part is critical. So I wish we could do more. We haven't done enough, but I just try to go give speeches to anybody that'll listen. And I've been doing that for about 21 years now. And I usually tell my son's story, show a few pictures of him. And that kind of resonates with the audience. It's true. And then I just tell them what I've learned in the last 21 years. And my doctor friends and my scientist friends have created a bunch of slides for me, and I just show them to whichever audience it is. And I find that to be very helpful. And I think the crowd finds it to be helpful. And I really believe in this country, we won't get a handle on addiction until we recognize what it is. Now, here's the other thing about addiction. Let me just tell you. Like most families, my family has had some cancer in it. When your loved one gets cancer or any other disease, Oklahomans and Americans, they're the best people. You will be embraced by your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues. They'll come over, they'll bring food to your house, give you a hug. I mean, that's so helpful. But when your loved one is an addict, it's a totally different ball game. You're not embraced. It's like an elephant in the room. There is a stigma of shame associated with addiction. It's bad people doing bad things. That's what the majority of people think. There have been plenty of surveys demonstrating this. I even saw a survey of doctors that I think it was like 60 or 70% of most doctors answered this survey and said they don't even want addicts in their waiting room. I mean, it's just a common misperception. And until we change that, we're not going to be able to deal with it. And I have a dear friend of mine named Gary Medell. He has a nonprofit called Shatterproof, and he's on the front lines of addiction. His son committed suicide because he had trouble defeating this disease of addiction. And he wrote a note, and he told his dad, he said, "Dad, I just wish people knew I'm not a bad person, I'm just sick." And he took his own life because of that. That stigma, we've got to change that. And it's going to take education to do that. So those two things, helping Sister Rosemary with Sowing Hope and fighting addiction through education, they've occupied the better part of my first 21 years after Brandon died. Now, something else happened 5 years ago. My son, Dylan was born with another disease of the brain. Unlike Brandon wasn't born with it, he acquired it. But Dylan was born with epilepsy, and he went through, one day he had 300 seizures. We gave him every medicine they could find, couldn't figure out one that would stop it. He had brain surgery. They inserted a device, an electrical stimulator, and that really helped a lot. But it didn't make him go away. And he later had brain surgery. They were hoping to cut out the part of the brain that caused epilepsy, but they couldn't find it. So we learned to live with it. That kid never complained once. He was probably the toughest person I ever met. I can't even imagine what it would be like to have a seizure. We were determined to make that kid live as normal a life as we could. And even though he had epilepsy, and some people might say, well, you can't do anything. You can't drive, you can't you can't swim, My family, we're avid motorcyclists. Nope, can't do that. Well, Dylan, he rode bulls, he surfed in the ocean, he rode motorcycles all over the country. He did all those things, and it was so cool seeing him do it. We never thought for a while there he'd ever graduate from high school because it was so difficult. He did. He went to college. He graduated from East Central and got a good job. He had a great job. And then we got hit with a train. He died of something that we had never heard of called SUDEP, sudden unexplained death from epilepsy. We had no clue that could even happen. And that kind of rocked our world. So his little sister, Hannah, has done exactly what I'm doing with Brandon and addiction. She is a force to be reckoned with already. She's only 26 years old, but she wants to do what I'm doing and try to make a little dent in the world in a good way and do something about epilepsy. Most people want to do good, but I think most people say, I'm just one person. I can't really change the world. And that's true. One person can't change the world. But if we all collectively can do a little, then we can collectively do a lot. And that's what Hannah's doing. And she's, now on the board of Cure Epilepsy, which is the biggest foundation in America stimulating research on epilepsy. I think Cure Epilepsy might find a cure for epilepsy. We'll see. So my friend Renzi Stone lost his firstborn son to epilepsy. And they started a foundation called the Isaiah Stone Foundation, he and his wife Leanne. And so Renzi asked Hannah and I to be on that board. Actually, Renzi took Dylan and I to Chicago 3 months before he died to the Cure Epilepsy annual fundraiser. They raised $2 million that night. And we have pictures of Dylan standing at that fundraiser, grinning. And he said, "Dad, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to help cure epilepsy, and I want to help the Isaiah Stone Foundation." 3 months later, he lost his life to that. Hannah now is on that board of Cure Epilepsy. They asked her to speak at their annual fundraiser. Most kids her age couldn't have done that because there were like 1,000 people there. But she did it, brought the house down, raised a lot of money, and she's just going to be a game changer. So, I don't know what's going to happen. It probably won't happen in my lifetime. I bet it happens in Hannah's lifetime, but they eventually will find a cure for epilepsy. Now I'm back to the addiction front for a moment. The state of Oklahoma sued Big Pharma. They recovered over $925 million. We got one of the best recoveries of all the states that sued. And about $197 million of that settlement went to Oklahoma State to create a new foundation called the National Center for Wellness and Recovery. I think that's another Casey Shrum project. Dr. Shrum is leading that charge. And the things that are happening there, I'm just so excited about it. It's probably the best kept secret in this country. But we have now some of the greatest, most important scientists working for us in the field of addiction. Their executive director is a guy by the name of Don Kyle. Don was formerly a scientist that worked for Purdue, and he's absolutely brilliant and a dear friend of mine. Don holds over 100 patents, and he was able to talk Purdue. This doesn't have anything to do with the lawsuit or the settlement, but he talked Purdue into donating hundreds and hundreds of what they call molecules. These are molecules that have already passed certain levels of testing in animals to show promise as a non-addictive painkiller. That's sort of the holy grail in the field of addiction right now, because so many people get addicted just by going to their doctor and having surgery and taking opioids too long. I can promise you this. We know this as a matter of science. If you took the nicest person in the world, just pick Mother Teresa. If you give Mother Teresa opioids long enough and in a sufficient quantity, she too would behave badly. She too would break the law. She too would lie, steal, because the chemistry of her brain would change too. It's just science. We need a non-addictive painkiller, and I believe that we will discover that there at the National Center for Wellness and Recovery in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I believe that's going to happen. We also, Don Kyle also was able to talk Purdue into donating 50,000 biosamples. These are genetic samples taken in multiple clinical trials over 25 years there at Purdue. They were going to throw them away. But Don talked them into donating it to the National Center, and they're on liquid nitrogen. Those genetic samples are going to be able to be studied by scientists all over the world. And our hope is that the key to finding a cure for addiction lies in those genetic samples. Like I said, I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime. That kind of thing is a long-term project. I think it's going to happen. And one day somebody will be able to test my theory and, say, well, Reggie and his friends at the National Center predicted this would happen. It is going to happen. And that's my hope and that's my belief. And I think it's going to happen as a result of Oklahoma bringing that lawsuit and winning that lawsuit and settling it and creating the National Center for Wellness and Recovery. So great things are going to happen. So look, the moral of this story is none of us can change the world by ourselves. Just do something. And I think I would not be here if I hadn't tried to do something. Losing my two sons taught me a lot, and it's been good for me. It's therapy for me. So that's what I've been doing. I have a day job, but I really enjoy my nonprofit work, and that's what keeps me going. And so that's kind of what we've been doing in that second part of my life for the last 21 years.
Yeah.
My daughter Hannah actually got to go see Sister Rosemary and hang out with her in Uganda. Yeah. I was shocked and horrified to find out that Sister Rosemary actually took Hannah and my niece over the border into South Sudan. I didn't know they were going to do that, and I wasn't happy about that. But Sister Rosemary just laughed that little laugh of hers and said, "Oh, Reggie," you'd have to know Sister to get what I'm saying there, but you can Google her and you'll see she's like a little grinning leprechaun. She's very funny. But anyway, I didn't think that was funny at the time, yeah. But Hannah went all over Africa with Sister Rosemary and learned a lot. So in her work on epilepsy, she and some of the friends that she met have come up with the idea we need to do something about epilepsy in Africa. With one drug that's very cheap, about 80%, maybe 80% plus of all people suffering from epilepsy can be treated successfully. And we want to see if we can do something about that. So Hannah's working on this little project. She's going to make a documentary film about epilepsy in Africa. So stay tuned. You'll see that, I think, in late 2023 or early 2024. But by raising awareness of that problem, we don't even need to raise that much money, I don't think. But we'll see. And that's a project that's in the can right now, and and she will shepherd that thing to its fruition here pretty soon. But I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'll put one last plug in for the movie. Mm-hmm. It's going to be launched in Ireland in September of this year, 2023. So they don't have a working title yet, so stay tuned, but it ought to be pretty interesting. So I guess the third thing, if you want to know what we're doing, in addition to addiction and epilepsy, the third thing, it occurred to us that this country has a problem with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We need more scientists, and I'm a scientist wannabe. I wasn't smart enough to be one, but I sure like it. And as a kid, I was fascinated with fossils and dinosaurs in particular. So when my son was born, guess what toys I'm buying him? I mean,
T-Rex.
Yeah, T-Rex was the favorite, and so Brontosaurus and, Allosaurus and all those. And then when Jurassic Park came out, that was Brandon's favorite movie, and we loved that stuff. So after Brandon passed, it occurred to me, why not do something in the educational field, try to get kids stimulated in dinosaurs. So it's kind of a long story, but I'll make it short. I wanted to find a dinosaur quarry and get some of my scientist friends, because I have a lot of friends, and some of them are paleontologists, and I'm a paleontologist wannabe. So, I went to Wyoming. I tried to find a quarry up there because that's dinosaur country. I went to Montana. I even went to Switzerland because there was a guy there that had a dinosaur quarry, and we tried to buy it, and I was unsuccessful. I gave up. And a couple of years went by, and I heard that there was some land available for sale in the panhandle of Oklahoma, which I had very rarely been to. It's an area called Black Mesa. And so I go up there with my two brother-in-laws, and they're hunters. They're hunting deer and turkeys, and I don't hunt that. I'm hunting something that died specifically about 150 million years old. That's twice as old as T-Rex. It's all like a layer cake. This land is laid down in layers, and like in Oklahoma City, you can't find rocks at the surface that are 150 million years old, but you can in Cimarron County in the Panhandle. And if you go down to the State Museum of Natural History in Norman, the Sam Noble Museum, they have some of the finest dinosaurs in the world there. And many of them came from Black Mesa. The curator back in the 30s and the 40s was finding those dinosaur bones and bringing them to the museum in Sam Noble. And so it wasn't called Sam Noble then. So we went out there, and sure enough, there were a lot of old quarries. They actually all got shut down when Pearl Harbor happened. And so for the most part, there wasn't really much digging going on in Oklahoma after Pearl Harbor. But those old quarries were there, so we got a hold, with the museum's help and some of our paleontologist friends, we got a hold of the quarry maps. The quarry number 5 was the most exciting one. A lot of bones came out of there. They closed that quarry in 1944, I believe. There was a dinosaur that nobody knows about called Saurophaganax. It looks like a T-Rex, twice as old, more than twice as old. But Saurophaganax, if he ever met T-Rex in a dark alley, Saurophaganax would kick T-Rex's butt. T-Rex had these little puny arms. He couldn't even reach his mouth. But Saurophaganax had these huge muscular arms, quite long, but he had these scythes. They were like a sword on the end of both hands. It was a very bad boy. There is a replica Saurophaganax in Norman at the Sam Noble Museum, and it's trying to eat a Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus. People are kind of debating what the name of that animal is, but it's fabulous. If you haven't been down there, you need to go down there. But that dinosaur came from Black Mesa.
Okay.
So I want to find it. So I bought 700 acres out there 10 or 12 years ago. All my scientist friends go out there every summer. So my movie maker, Derek Watson, and I are walking out there with a scientist one day. And Derek actually saw the first bone. He said, he had been with me to Wyoming. He'd seen fossils. And he said, Reggie, that looks like bone. Well, it was. It was more than 150 million years old. It was just a little bone, about an inch long. So we brought digging equipment out there and punched into the side of that hill. We now call that the Homestead Quarry. Tons of dinosaur bones have come out of that quarry in the last 10 years. Our scientist friends will be out there in June of 2023 doing their annual dig. And each year we punch into the side of that hill further. We've been doing it for over 10 years. Some of the most scientifically important bones that have ever come out of Oklahoma came out of that quarry. We were taking kids out there every year before COVID, and they were getting to help dig on these bones. It was really cool. And so, hopefully we'll ramp that educational program back up. But we created this program called Explorology. And the name is obvious. We want to explore all of the ologies. Paleontology is my favorite, but biology, zoology, whatever. If it's an ology, we want to teach kids about it. And we have all these wonderful scientists that have day jobs, but they volunteer and they go out there and they teach these kids hands-on. These kids get to dig on a real dinosaur fossil, and it's really cool. Now, we may have actually found some of Saurophaganax, because no one's ever found the skull of Saurophaganax. But we have found a couple of predator teeth. And they we know they're either Saurophaganax or Allosaurus, which is another big T-Rex looking critter. But you could take those teeth that we found and hold them up into the light, and you can see the serrated edges just like a steak knife. And these are 150 million years old. It's amazing. But we still haven't found the skull, so stay tuned. So we're in the process right now of making a film. It's probably going to be my last documentary film. But, we've made, I think I told you about Sowing Hope, about Sister Rosemary. We made an addiction film called Killing Pain. It's a 7-episode film. It explains the biology of addiction and how it works, and I think that's very helpful. A lot of schools are using it as an educational tool. And this one is going to be called The Lost Dinosaurs of Black Mesa. Now, why were they lost? Well, they were lost 150 million years ago when they died, but some of those bones were discovered in the 30s and 40s, and they were taken to Norman, and they were wrapped in plaster and newspapers, and they sat under the football stadium for 70 years. And Dr. Michael Mares from Sam Noble started unwrapping them in the late 80s, and some of the most scientifically important dinosaur bones in the world, including what's called Pentaceratops. It is this incredible dinosaur that has the tallest dinosaur skull of any creature that ever walked on Earth. That head is down there in the museum. You got to see it. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records. But Pentaceratops is just one example. But anyway, those bones were lost twice. If Dr. Mares hadn't ordered us to open those, they were probably going to just get thrown away. They sat there for 70 years, and now they're just incredible. So that's the film we're working on right now, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. So stay tuned. It'll come out probably in the spring of 24.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And now didn't the new Jurassic Park just come out recently? There was a new movie came out, right?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, most people are going to see the title of this podcast, right? They're going to see your name and they're going to think this is going to be a podcast about, some cases. And I know, if you Google, the law firm, you're going to come up with some pretty famous cases that you guys have been involved in, right? Obviously, this is the last thing that they're going to find out once they listen to this whole episode. Yeah. But what I love is the fact that kind of you grew up, with role models, your mum and your dad, both entrepreneurs, right? You get your hard work kind of from that, and then you, like I said, in 8th grade, you wanted to be a lawyer. You knew where you wanted to go. You do the scholarship, you do that, and then your world is rocked, right? Like you're 40 years old, right? In your 40s, you're rocking and rolling. You think, I'm being a lawyer, we're doing great. You've got a family, and then your world is rocked, and you go through all of what you just told us, and you come back, from Uganda with a sense of purpose and a sense of, this is what my life is now, right? I have to channel, all the stories that you have, and not just Brandon's, Dylan's, and Hannah's getting involved now, and the whole family's getting involved with this stuff. And you mentioned education, the dino stuff. The law firm's just funding what you really want to do, right? And your life's purpose, and that's what I love, is the fact that we chat for an hour, we could talk for 10 hours about, everything that makes you tick and everything that makes you get out of bed in the morning. Some of your clients might probably be mad if I say this, but it's not for them, it's for the foundation and the education of the kids, right? That you're working so hard for them, to make money, but you're not spending it on, a brand new Ferrari, right? You're spending it on, doing all these trips around the world to educate kids and to build schools and all that stuff. Like it's incredible, and like you said, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, but you're making a dent, right? And that's all it takes is, or a ripple or a wave or whatever it is, and you're starting it. Yeah. And some other people, there's so many stories out there, and I know personal friends who have dealt with, childhood death and stuff like that, and it's crippled the family, and and obviously it's not easy to deal with, and you've dealt with it in your own way, but you've channeled that into, great, I have a work ethic, I've been raised right, I'm gonna, what can we do about this? And you just dedicate every waking minute that you have away from your job, your day job, because you still work every day, into raising money and doing all the other stuff. So it's incredible.
Thank you. I couldn't do it without a very patient wife. I mean, I recognize I'm a bit of a nut, and she figured that out pretty early, and she didn't run, and she's put up with a lot because I am kind of obsessive compulsive, but making a little dent in these problems is what we're trying to do. And I wish I could do more, but I'm committed. I did represent the state of Oklahoma. I'll end up giving my entire fee away to these nonprofits. I made some money. I wish I could have handled that case. I do a lot of pro bono work as a lawyer for free. Some of my favorite cases are helping some children and some other people that I didn't charge a fee on, but I couldn't afford to handle. If you're going to take on Big Pharma, let me just tell you, they've got more lawyers than we ever had. They've got more money than we ever had. But I'm committed to giving away every dime I made on the opioid lawsuit. I've already given a great sum of that away, and I'm giving a lot more away. And I have to make a living just like everybody else, but as you can probably tell, I haven't talked about the law. My passion is with those nonprofits, and we've put over 50,000 kids through one or another of our explorology programs. I know the fighting addiction through education. I don't have a number for you, but I know we've helped a lot of people. And all I really wanted to do there was educate. But unfortunately, my name kind of got around, and I get a call a week from parents that said, I heard about you. Can you find me somewhere I can put my kid to get treatment? And so I've kind of been forced to get into the field of treatment. I'm not qualified to do that. But I know a lot of people now, and I think I know where to send people. We brought to Oklahoma a program called Atlas from the Shatterproof nonprofit that I told you about earlier. So now the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse website has this Atlas program. and it helps you find treatment. So if you're a parent or you have a loved one and you can't figure out where to go to the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance website, look at the Atlas program, you fill out a few questions, and it will help you find where to go. It'll do a lot better job than I can do. So we're just trying to make a dent, and on the expirology, I guarantee you a lot of kids are going to go to college and become some kind of a scientist because of that program, and we don't care. They don't have to be a paleontologist. I don't care what they end up doing. All we want to do is stimulate a young mind, and that's what happened to me. When I was a kid, dinosaurs, they didn't have Jurassic Park back then, but it was kind of crude graphics, but first dinosaur I saw, man, that just stimulated me to read comic books and books at the library, and that led to going to college. And so that's all we're trying to do. And it's been really good therapy for me. So I'm just really fortunate. And my life is, my cup is more than half full. I wish my boys were here. It's a different life than I envisioned. But I'm very grateful for the family that I have. And I know my boys would love what we're doing.
Yeah. Do we need to, is there anything else? You good? Okay. Finishing up, because some less deep personal questions. You mentioned you were in band. What'd you play when you were in band?
I'll tell you what I wanted to play first.
Yeah.
I wanted to play the drums.
Okay.
And my mom and dad couldn't afford a drum set. So they wanted me to play trumpet because my older brother could pass down his trumpet to me. So we fought about it. So we compromised on the trombone.
Yeah.
And so, I was actually pretty good, but I finally had to choose between the debate program and band. And as a junior, I dropped out of band and focused on debate. And that was probably the best thing for me to do. But I do love music too, but that'll have to wait for maybe another one of my kids to be a musician.
Yeah. The other thing is you kind of referenced your family, your love of motorcycles and motorcyclists.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I told you my dad was a car dealer, so that definitely got me into the world of sports cars because, my dad had 3 boys, and every time he'd get a sports car in as a trade-in, us boys would get to drive it for a while until he sold it. So we had, at one time or another, we had all the cool sports cars, Mustangs, Camaros, whatever. But if you love hot cars, you're probably going to like motorcycles. I was an avid reader, so I started buying all the motorcycle magazines, and I researched. I found an article. I gave it to my dad in the 9th grade, 10th grade. It was an article saying 10 reasons why motorcycles are safer than cars. It didn't work.
Clearly.
My dad didn't fall for it. He said, that's the stupidest article I've ever found. The guy that wrote it's an idiot. And so, he wouldn't let me, I was saving my money. He wouldn't let me get a motorcycle. So I learned to ride a motorcycle on one of my friends' little Honda. And so I was determined to ride the rest of my life. And I have done that. And I rode until when I went my first year of college, Oklahoma Baptist at Shawnee, my roommate had a Honda 250. And so, man, I rode that. If he wasn't riding it, I was riding it. And then, as soon as I could afford it, I bought a Harley. And today, I'm a motorcycle collector. I have about 30, and I've given about 30 away to my friends and family. And I have a little man cave, and it's one of my favorite places to be. I can sit in my chair and look at about these 30 bikes. And I look at them a lot more than I ride them. I don't have time to ride them. But, yeah, we've ridden all over the country. I got to ride from a bunch of friends of mine, went on a dinosaur bone trip in Chile and Argentina. So we flew to Santiago, Chile, and the first time we rode to the central part of Argentina. It's an area called the Mountains of the Moon, and got to go to a couple of dinosaur quarries. And the second time, we rode from Santiago, Chile, all the way down to Patagonia, the tip of the continent of South America. And we went, I have a famous scientist friend of mine named Paul Sereno. He's probably the most famous paleontologist in America. He's a dear friend of mine, lives in Chicago. But I taught him to ride. I gave him a BMW 1250, which he still has, and that's what we rented in South America, were BMW 1250s, best bike in the world. And so the second time we rode down to Argentina and went to some of those quarries down there. That's where they're finding the biggest dinosaurs in the world generally are in South America and China. But you can Google Paul Sereno. He's truly the most famous dinosaur hunter in the world today. And Paul was actually clearly one of the characters in one of the later Jurassic Park movies was modeled after Paul Sereno, because I've known him almost 20 years. You can't hardly ever see Paul unless he's wearing a blue shirt with a vest. And I forget the name of the character, but in one of the later dinosaur Jurassic Park movies, the guy's riding a motorcycle and he's got the blue vest and blue shirt. Well, no question in my mind that was modeled after Paul Sereno. He's found a dinosaur on every continent except Antarctica. And so we're very fortunate to hang around with him. And by golly, I found a dinosaur bone in Argentina, just walking. I held it up to Paul and I said, "This looks like bone." And he looked at me and he said, "That is the distal tibia of a Herrerasaurus." And I'd never heard of that. I said, "Now, how do you know that?" He said, "I wrote the definitive article on Herrerasaurus." So later I Googled it. He sure did. And that dinosaur bone is now sitting on my mantle. Yeah. Paul put it in a little glass case for me. And oddly enough, it's much older. It's about 230 million years old. It's one of the first dinosaurs they've ever discovered. So I've been really fortunate and got to do a lot of cool stuff. But, here's the key. You can't do something fun, cool, or helpful if you don't dream about it first. If you're going to ask, what is the order of doing things, I put dreaming first. Because if you don't dream about it, you're probably not going to do it. Unless just you got lucky. But nobody gets lucky all the time. So I've dreamed about doing a lot of things. I've got to do most of them. I'm happy with the fact I haven't got to do everything. Like I said, I miss my boys. But I'm confident my boys would be so happy about the things that I have done instead of, drinking myself to death or something worse. So, I'm pretty content.
Yeah, the life that you've lived, since those both tragedies, just goes to show, like I said, you're not wasting any days, right? Like and you're still dreaming. Like I said, you haven't done everything yet, so there's still things on the dream list that you haven't accomplished, and maybe you might, you might get to all of them, maybe you won't. But the good thing about dreams is there's always something bigger and better that we should do next, right?
There sure is.
There's always another bike that you should be buying or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm confident I'm not going to do everything I'm dreaming about because I'm dreaming about a lot more, but that's okay. I'm actually very content. I tell my kids all the time, I turn 68 next month, and if I were to end my life tomorrow, I feel really good. I've done as many things as I could squeeze in my time, so I'm very content, and I'm just going to keep burning the candle at both ends, and that probably sounds corny, but it's true. Yeah.
Well, one fuels the other, right? You've got to do one to fuel the rest of it. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking just over an hour of your time to share some great stories, shed some light on some topics that definitely do need more awareness. For people listening, we'll get the links to all the websites and put those in the description so people can go down there and just kind of get involved. If someone's listening that has a family member that they're kind of worried about, or is dealing with something like this themselves, then if this helps one person, then we've done our jobs. So yeah, thank you so much. Again, I think finishing up, and you were inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame 2015. Did that come as a shock to you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have never asked for any kind of an award. I really haven't. And that's one thing I didn't dream about and don't dream about. I didn't set out to do any of these things. And I'll just tell you for sure, I'm no hero. I didn't ask for this job. And I wasn't doing any of these things before Brandon died. I mean, I'm sure I was a pretty nice guy. I wasn't doing anything except making a living and taking care of my family. But I'm different now. Yeah. And I didn't ask for that award. It did come out of the blue, and I don't know why they thought that I should get inducted, but I'm honored to be in there. And I think it's cool that they're spreading the word, because I talk to a lot of kids, and you can see the light bulb come on. A lot of these kids, they look at me and they say, he's from Seminole. If he can do it, I can do it. And, we had a kid named Ernesto Vargas. He joined the explorology program in the 8th grade, little Hispanic kid. He was poor. He was in that program for 4 years. He ended up getting a Gates Millennium Scholarship. I was hoping he'd stay in Oklahoma, but he went to the University of Chicago. He went to work for my friend Paul Sereno in his lab. He graduated at Chicago. He finished his PhD in paleontology. And that guy is working at the American Museum of Natural History right now, which is where Paul used to work. He is going to be a famous paleontologist. That one kid got to go out to the Panhandle and dig on a dinosaur bone. Boom. Look what he's doing with his life. He dreamed, and he's doing it. So, I'm really proud of Ernesto, but he's not the only one. Right. A bunch of these kids are just like me. They were stimulated by a dream, and who cares what it is, just as long as you're dreaming. And my advice to all those kids is, dream big, but you're not dreaming big enough. Dream bigger. Yeah.
There was an hour and 12 minutes of reasons why you were being inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, so I wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing some great stories. I know there's many more. I look forward to doing this again. I also have a car podcast or an automotive podcast, so if you want to nerd out about bikes for an hour, we can make that happen too. But until that time, thank you so much for sharing great stories. It's fantastic what you're doing. You're not wasting a day. You're dreaming big. And you're a perfect example to Ernesto and these other kids to come that you can do anything. So
well, thank you for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. For people listening, those links will be in the description down below, and we will catch you next episode. Cheers. Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at OklahomaHOF. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is presented by the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw people have a rich history and a bright future. At the Choctaw Cultural Center, you can take part in a story 14,000 years in the making. Stroll through our immersive exhibits portraying Choctaw life from the moment our ancestors emerged from the Nani Waiha in Mississippian homelands to the Trail of Tears, where we lost so many loved ones, and finally to the modern-day tribe making a positive impact on local communities throughout southeastern Oklahoma. Try your hand at our social dancing and stickball and learn more about our vibrant culture through demonstrations, workshops, and classes. The kids will have a blast in our Luxie Activity Center. The Choctaw Cultural Center is more than a museum. It's a living, breathing experience. Visit ChoctawCulturalCenter.com to plan your visit. This podcast is brought to you by the Oklahoma Beef Council on behalf of Oklahoma's 50,000 beef farming and ranching families. We are working hard every day to bring high-quality beef to your table. To learn more, visit oklabeef.org. That's oklabeef.org, linked below. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.